Welcome back to Animal Crossing New Horizons. I'm dear darling. I should see what's going on our lovely island of Fawnhallow today. Relaxing as per usual. We do have D&D today. I think it's going to be a relatively relaxed session, actually, if all things considered, because I think it's going to be the ending of this group's downtime. Maybe, I don't super know. To be honest, like I know they want to have this sort of battle thing. I don't think we're going to get to the battle today, or at least I will probably say like you shouldn't get to it today because it's going to take a long time. Like battles take a long time is the thing. So hello there everyone. Right now in Fawnhallow, 6:14 PM on Friday, February 20th, 2026. This is my prediction, as I predict that they're going to try and sort of rally their allies together in this one, and then we'll jump forward to the battle, which will be the next session. Is my assumption, which will be on Monday, to be fair. We could do the battle now. I'd probably do, because it was a battle actually I prepared a while back. But, you know, in light of yesterday's conversation, I suppose, about making more interesting combat, I probably want to revamp it a little bit to make it a bit more interesting. So I think there's some fascinating elements to go to it. Because I want to make it challenging, but not challenging as in you had to make, like, perfect strategic decisions. I want to make it challenging as in, like, interesting, you know, engaging in one way or another, but we'll see. I will say I've completed the next part of Amphoris' story. I completed the part with Ceridra and ACNH. I also really liked it, to be honest. I'm not sure if it's quite as good as the final story part, but it is really good, and it actually did make me like Ceridra a lot as a character. It's interesting because she's basically, the only thing I knew about her is I knew she was like a tyrant or something as a ruler or something. But then I'm just like, okay, she is kind of like a tyrant. She's kind of just like a, you know, and justify the meeting sort of person. Is how I see it. And she's honestly very engaging and very interesting, and, you know, a capable character as well, without being a capable character who is not just like pushes up glasses. I planned this exactly all along. You know, it reminds me of a video I watched about, you know, writing smart characters in fiction. And it talks about things like Sherlock Holmes. The Benedict Cumberbatch version is not really a smart character. He's basically a psychic character, which is not a good way of displaying smart. Ceridra, I think, sort of, you know, toes the line in a bit more like anime way. She doesn't feel like she's psychic to me, but she does feel like she's very smart and very... She has a plan for things, but, you know, some things, she doesn't get everything right. You know, there are things which show like wrinkles in her plans, but then she adapts on them very quickly, is what this video essay basically was like, what helps demonstrate a smart character. Is that based on the information, I think the perfect way they encapsulated it was like, they make a great decision based off the information they have at that time, but they don't know everything. And then once new information comes to light, they revisit their decision, refactor it, and then make the next best decision from that point onwards. I've never watched a Sherlock series, so I can't certainly say for certain if Sherlock is psychic or not. There's certainly times where it does feel like it in sort of like whodunits, right? Where it's like, oh, why does this character do XYZ? I don't know, but it just seems through divine intervention they managed to guess this information, which is of course rather unsatisfying. But it's a really interesting thing, I think. You know, writing characters who are not your own. Because while I think, sorry, moving my mic, stories tend to feel more true in a way if you write characters based off your own stories, stories that you want to share. I think it's a bit reductive to say, you know, authors or creators can't write stories not from their perspective or not from something that they've experienced necessarily. I mean, obviously there's a caveat to that, but, you know, depending on the content of the story, it should at least obviously be done in a respectful way rather than one which just makes a mockery of people who do have those stories necessarily. But it is a bit ridiculous. Otherwise, you know, if you don't allow for that, then you'll get the most boring stories in existence where every story is basically an autobiography or snippets of an autobiography. Or I guess even a very interesting consequence, I suppose, is that every story needs to be a collaboration between many different authors, each one representing a character that you desire. Obviously, those are two extremes, and I'm not saying that those two extremes are necessarily anyone's personal opinions. I'm sure most people sort of lie in between, being like, yeah, you know, I agree with it on the whole, or something. But there's always that very interesting caveat of writing characters who are better at something than you are, in a way which makes it hard to extrapolate. you know? Because there are some things which are more difficult, I believe, to extrapolate than others with stories. Like, I'm not an author, but let's use myself as an example. Could I write a story about someone who is very, you know, strong, athletically fit? Am I that athletically capable? No, not really. Like, my most athletical prowess goes to terms of I was pretty decent at athletics back in school. I'm above average at sprinting back at school. Nowadays, maybe not so much, to be honest. I don't really do a lot of exercise, to be real. But yes, I'm still kind of fast for someone who doesn't really run at all. So, I mean, yeah. But could I write a story about someone who is really good at, like, boxing, per se? Maybe. I'm sure, like, if I were to write about the boxing industry, I'd get things pretty wrong. But, you know, like, having the trait of being good at boxing, being physically strong, certainly feels like it's easier to extrapolate things, you know. Maybe in one way it's more direct or another. And maybe in some ways it's because that's very much a sort of tell thing instead of a show thing. How do you show someone strong? You know, they lift a heavy weight or something. Or they do it with ease, or they show that they, you know, work out a lot or something like that. But showing a character smart is actually quite difficult, right? Especially because if you're not as smart as the character you're trying to write. You know, I'm not saying that people are dumb, but I'm saying that, you know, very few people are, like, I don't know, world-renowned geniuses. Or, but if you want to write a story containing a world-renowned genius, how do you do that? And I think that's very interesting, at least, in ways, because it's sort of like breaking down what is intelligence. Obviously, there's many different sort of avenues and types of intelligence, of course. You know, there's a certain difference between what you might call book smart and street smart, right? Intelligence versus wisdom. Both are things, and I don't think I can actually make it to that. I wanted to see if I can actually make it down to that weed, but it seems like that's not the case. Probably be easier for me to do it from a frontman. I should do something with a secret base at the back, but I never will, probably. But yeah, writing intelligence is very interesting. And yeah, there are different types of intelligence. You can have characters who are very good, have very, very good memories. Does that make them intelligent? Yes, in one form. You can write a character who's very, very wise, has amazing intuition. Does that make them smart? Yes, in one form. You know. But obviously, I'm not here to discuss the different types of intelligence. I'm sure you can make those conclusions yourself. But, you know, while I say that, you'd still have the image of what overall a smart character would be like, you know. And it, you know, I think it just sort of goes to, you have to sort of think about people who you know are smart in your life and what makes them so smart. You have to sort of really break down people, in a way, personalities, facets of who they are, and try and sort of bridge that gap, right? I think in some ways, you know, like, what if you're trying to write a character who's very creative and you yourself aren't or don't see yourself as a creative in that sense, very imaginative. You know, you can easily flanderize the entire thing, just make him like a cloud cuckoo lander who just says anything that comes to mind. But creativity, I think, is being able to, you know, see things from a different perspective, really. Shift things around to see unorthodox point of views, which they use in their own understanding of a world. And I find that it's a very fascinating problem to be able to. How do you write someone who is not yourself, in a way? Because I mean, it does extend out to other things as well. Like, how do I write a story about someone, let's say, who grew up in like Belgium? Like, I've been to Belgium a few times. And by a few times, I mean once, I think. But I don't really know, like, what it's like to grow up in Belgium. It's the same thing that you would always do, but you would just basically research or something. You know, like, what things from, like, a formal perspective are Belgians known for, and from a more casual, like, you know, people's own experiences about living in Belgium be like. But it's a bit harder to do that about being smart, right? Like, I guess you can read up about people who are considered smart, you know, like Albert Einstein, right? Stephen Hawking, any of these, like, field medalists or Nobel Prize winners. Of course, that's only mathematically and scientifically smart, but I mean, it's a starting point, isn't it? You know, how do you go from there and be like, right, what makes them smart? You know, you kind of have to delve into their own way of thinking, which is a bit harder, especially because, like, for example, take Albert Einstein, and, you know, things like the theory of relativity. That's a pretty difficult thing for, like, anyone to really, just like a person to randomly understand. without some significant amount of research. And even then, it's not always going to be particularly relevant. You want to write a smart character, you know, but you don't want them to be like a physicist or something like that. How do you show that they're smart? And it's interesting because I wonder what people what the general consensus would be of people who would agree on is this is a smart character. You know, this is a character who seems smart. Because it's also kind of that you write the world that you're writing for, that you created in the first place, right? So you get to define like the information that they know. The laws of relativity, the laws of existence, or something which exist in your world, they can figure out, and you are kind of an expert in your world, right? Difficulty becomes when your world that you're writing in is a real world, because then it's sort of like, well, you know, those rules of relativity are like much more well defined than a fictional world's rules. And other people might be experts in the rules that govern this world more so than you might be, which makes it difficult. I wonder, who is, I don't know, smart characters in fiction? Top 32 most intelligent characters in fiction you know of. The Doctor, that's a good one. Doctor from Doctor Who's very smart. Because that's the thing as well. I think there's Sherlock Holmes any version. You know, that's interesting. Because he does appear smart, but he's like psychically smart to a point of be like ridiculous. Like I like to think of myself as like somewhat smart, but I'm not like an expert in that many fields. Like certainly I have more of a lean towards mathematical and scientific fields. But it's always very interesting, you know, hearing things like pseudoscience, I suppose, portrayed in movies, fictional movies, to explain something one way or another. And I wouldn't say I get like angry at it or anything. I think that's a bit much. But it's interesting like how different fictional properties present it one way or another, and how much it allows me personally. Sorry, a little bit of a pause, but I do remember what I was talking about was how much investment I can have in things which present like pseudo-scientific, like made-up scientific things and whatnot, and how it can really vary, I think, depending on the way that they present it. Because weirdly enough, I find myself buying into it. Again, I'm sure there's like some level of like pompousness I have, like a level of a hubris I have to even think I begin to understand certain mathematical things here and there, or scientific things to a degree that would be enough to rival, I suppose, the scope or the level of what they speak about in media properties. So I do acknowledge that. At the same time, these are my human emotions, and you know, I only have so much control over them. But I do find myself sort of being able to buy in more when they obfuscate it even further, rather than like I guess it's sort of like I don't tend to love it when they're just like, oh, this is they're trying to define it within the laws of reality we have. Excuse me, because that's such a difficult balance to get right, you know, because you have to have things be exactly perfectly correct, otherwise it doesn't make sense in the laws of reality. For example, you know, I'm trying to think of a good one. But I can't remember what we did in Tenet, but I remember Tenet's one and me being like, what? Because like when you're trying to find things which obviously can't happen in reality, like time travel in that sense, happening in the space of reality using reality's laws, obviously it doesn't happen in reality, so it is impossible in that sense, or at least we don't know a conceivable way it could happen. You have to be very, very careful about it, because your definition inherently is like having a battle where it doesn't make sense. And like Ant-Man's like another good one. Like we have like pin particles, where like, oh, the particles just like come closer together or something, so it shrinks. The space between them shrinks, essentially to make things smaller. And I'm like, okay, I can kind of buy into that. But then there's some other thing, I don't remember the properties of it anymore, but I just remember watching it being like, you know, Tenant, I just remember I was just like, I'm not buying that. Like, what does that even mean? Because it was like trying to defy them laws of like reality. At least with like Ant-Man's one, it's like at least they made up a new particle, you know, and just being like, oh, here's a new thing. Like, does this Pym's particle, like, you could be like, well, that Pym's particle doesn't make sense. It doesn't behave in a way that we'd expect particles usually do. Well, this is a fictional Pym's particle, so we can make it do whatever it wants. And it's something about like it shrinking in size, which I was like, actually think by itself that's like a fine thing, you know, like it shrinks a space between like what was it, the atoms or something, which, you know, adds up over a long scale to make things impossibly small. And I'm like, okay, but I kind of see that that's how things keep density. Let's assume that does work for a moment or whatever. But then it goes on to like break its own laws, whatever, you know, like Hank Pym just carries around like a keychain like truck or something, which he expands, and it's like, well, if it keeps a density, then that's going to be like a literal truck hanging off that keychain. And how does a chain hold it up? I don't know. Like, obviously you sort of rule or cool it, but I'm like, if you're going to rule of cool it, rule of cool the science behind it as well. I can buy into it if you're just like, whoa, it turns out there's like a different like set of different like physics system that we can work with, which, you know, can dynamically, I don't know, change its weight, I suppose, depending on the thing. Like, there's a Pym's particle, and also like a Hank particle, one which fluctuates the density or something of the particles, I don't know. Which means that he can carry it around, and then he can combine the two effects together to make it grow big and resume its density or something like that. I don't know, something like that, basically. Maybe it is explained and I just can't remember, but that's such is a way. But yeah, fictional science, it all makes it very interesting. And characters, and that's it. Like, how do you write a genius, essentially? Because it's very interesting, you know, I'm sure like the way that the populace now or media now portrays geniuses is different, I suppose. If things like Big Bang Theory or anything to go by, like, oh, these are people who are super smart. Maybe I be super smart. I've never watched Big Bang Theory, so Big Bang Theory, so I don't know. But Doctor Who, I think, is a really good example. Doctor Who is always someone who's like, oh yeah, he seems smart. And I think the way that video essay, I can't remember who did it, I'm sorry, off the top of my head, described it, actually is very smart by the way they describe it. Being like, yeah, it's not so much that they get everything right all the time, you know, that's not, if I see someone get something right all the time, I'm like, they're literally psychic. But someone who can draw correct conclusions very quickly and then adapt on the fly, that does seem, at least like logically, smart to me. So there is a sort of engagement there. I don't know. Maybe I can try and find who did that essay. I think it was by Toon. Genius characters writing. The problem with genius characters, I haven't seen that one. That's interesting. How do I write someone smarter than I am? Also a good one. How to write a character smarter than yourself. Crafting a genius. Happens a lot. Oh, maybe it was media retrospective? Maybe it's that one. Bad examples, yeah, Sherlock because he's psychic. Oh, and the Brainiac girl from the Homelander series, whatever that series is called. It's not called Homelander. What's it called? The Boys, that's it. Sidekick. What's her name? Sister Stage or something, right? Because I thought I don't know, I haven't seen it, but apparently she's got like a very retroactive smartness, which happens quite a lot in like anime and in these catch games as well. It's like, I'm so smart because I already predicted everything that would happen, so when something seems like it's not going my way, I just go, this is all according to plan because I already planned this entire thing out, including this exact detail. I'm like, come on. I don't want that. It doesn't seem smart, that makes you seem psychic. That makes it hard to believe in. And I think like retroactive genius is like the way they used to describe it. I'm like, that's a perfect encapsulation of what I dislike about the genius trope character when they push up their glasses and be like, that's exactly how I wanted things to go or something. And it not being like, you can do that if it's believable. But other times it's not believable. Like if you show that they had many contingencies, or you showed from the beginning that this was a plan that they were trying to go out, you saw something which clearly hinted to them going towards this, but if you just pull it out at the end without having any of a setup, that's what irks me. Anyway, long and short of it, I think Saritra seems pretty smart in Honkai Star Rail. That's about it. And that's what makes her engaging, or maybe it doesn't, I don't know. Anyway, If you have been watching, thank you very much. It's been Animal Crossing New Horizons. I've been dear darling. Likes, comments, subscription, shares greatly appreciated. Socials, Discord down below. Hope to see each other again, but for now it's our farewell. So until next time, bye bye for now.